Support for The Middle comes from you and from the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, preserving the story of the citizen soldier and connecting military history to the decisions citizens and leaders face today. Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson along with our DJ Tolliver. And Tolliver, as always, we are sending our signal out into space right now via the NPR satellite and then back down to Earth for live distribution on 493 public radio stations, which means it is possible, Tolliver, that aliens will hear our conversation this hour about whether it makes sense for humans to try to live on other planets.
Do you know that song, Earth is Ghetto, I Want to Leave?
No.
That's where I am right now, okay? That's where I am.
You want out of here. You know, we did get word the other day, Tolliver, that NASA is going to spend $20 billion trying to return astronauts to the moon before the end of President Trump's term, and they want to establish a permanent moon base. Notice I say moon, not Mars. That's because Mars is a lot farther away, and we have never sent a human to Mars. Do you know how many people have actually walked on the moon?
Michael Jackson, Tito Jackson.
No. The answer, actually, I'm surprised to say, is only 12. The last one was in 1972. NASA wants to change that now. And so do the billionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and others who are pouring their own money into colonizing the moon, and in the case of Musk, maybe Mars too. But since this space race affects all of us, we want to ask this hour what you think. Should humans be trying to live on other planets? We will get to your calls in a moment at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. But first, last week we talked about artificial intelligence and what it could do to your job. Here are some of the voicemails we got.
Hi, my name is Ariella Foss. I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I don't think AI will necessarily take my job. I do project management for a large healthcare organization. A lot of my work involves taking a lot of data, but then figuring out what the next steps are. And so it seems like this might be a more difficult task in the moment for AI.
This is Alex from New Hampshire. I'm a commercial credit analyst for a bank, which is a lot of repetitive analyses of financial statements and collateral. And I'm completely worried I'm going to lose my job to AI in the next 10 years. Almost quarterly, new AI tools are being added to our toolbox. I'm just kind of driving the AI.
I'm Ruth from Norman, Oklahoma. I'm an engineer for an airline, and I'm not worried AI is going to take my job yet because the airline is so far behind technology-wise and has a lot of red tape when it comes to government. So I think it will take a long time for AI to actually replace my job. Thanks.
Not sure I love hearing that AI, that an airline is so far behind technology-wise. But anyway, you can hear that full show on our podcast. Just subscribe to The Middle wherever you listen to podcasts. Our topic this hour is, should humans be trying to live on other planets? Tolliver, how can people reach us?
You can call us at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube.
And joining us this hour, Scott Solomon, evolutionary biologist at Rice University and author of the new book, Becoming Martian, How Living in Space Will Change Our Bodies and Minds. Scott, welcome to The Middle.
Hey, Jeremy.
And Erika Nesvold is with us as well, astrophysicist and co-founder of the JustSpace Alliance, which is a nonprofit that aims for a more inclusive and ethical future in space. Her book is called Off Earth, Ethical Questions and Quandaries for Living in Outer Space. Erika, great to have you on the show.
Happy to be here.
Well, and Scott, let me start with you. Your book raises a lot of questions about our ability as humans to actually live in space for long periods of time. What are some of the challenges that we already know about?
Well, of course, we know a lot about what happens to humans when we go to some parts of space. So, of course, we sent astronauts to the moon. As you mentioned, 12 Apollo astronauts walked on the moon. But since then, we've sent many, many more to the closer part of space that we call low Earth orbit. This is where the International Space Station is orbiting. It's close enough to Earth that it's actually not quite as bad as deeper parts of space like the moon. So if you're in low Earth orbit on the International Space Station, you are being exposed to radiation, not quite as much as on the moon or other parts of space like Mars. We know that radiation can have a variety of effects. It can affect your DNA. It can lead to mutations that could eventually cause cancer. We haven't actually seen that in astronauts, but there are some immediate effects of being in space. First of all, most astronauts get motion sick when they go to space. That's relatively mild, but the more serious concerns are, for example, the muscles that we use to hold our bodies up against gravity, they weaken in space. And then in response to the muscles being weaker, the bones actually start to become more brittle. So astronauts actually lose bone density at a rate of about 1.5% to 2% per month.
Right. So what do you think about the goal then of having a permanent moon base? Is that realistic?
Well, I have some concerns, and it really has to do with how long any one individual person is going to spend on the moon. So I think that getting there and having robotic technology there is all achievable. But if we're talking about having people spend long amounts of time on the moon, there are some big unknowns. So like I said, we lose bone density in lower gravity. We don't actually know whether being in partial gravity. What I mean by that is the moon has 1/6 the gravity of Earth. We don't know what that does to a person because the longest that any people have been on the moon was only about 3 days.
Right.
So,
long enough to say like one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, and then let's get out of here. Let's get back to Earth. Erika, what do you think when you hear about NASA or billionaires like Musk and Bezos say we've got to establish, a base on the moon or even Mars? Is it a pipe dream or is it something that we should be doing as a species?
I think that it's something that we will at some point do as a species. I personally, sorry, I know this is the title of the episode, try to stay away from shoulds because I know plenty of people have their own idea about whether we should or not. And what I advocate for is if you have plans, just try to make sure you're thinking through the implications of your plans. What are the health risks, as Scott just mentioned, for the people that you're going to send up there? How are you going to handle emergencies? Who's going to be making decisions for the group? How are you going to distribute resources? All the same problems we have to deal with on Earth, we're going to have to deal with on space. And I just argue that NASA or the billionaires or whoever ends up sending people there needs to be thinking through these problems as much as they're thinking about reusable rockets.
Well, and Eric, how much do people on Earth who will never be among those who actually travel to another planet or to the moon need to be thinking about this? Why does it matter for people who are just on Earth as this is all going on?
A lot of the things that we do in space affect those of us down here on Earth, as you mentioned earlier in the show. It's how we're talking to each other right now from different parts of the surface of this planet. So much of the technology we depend on nowadays is in the low Earth orbit that Scott mentioned before. And likely, if we end up establishing more of a human presence in space, there's going to be some sort of economy going back and forth between space and Earth. So it'll still affect people back on Earth. Plus, it will be our friends and relatives going off into space, potentially someday our descendants. And I find that the exercise of thinking about how we'll build these communities in space can help us think about how we want to run our societies and communities here on Earth, too.
Speaking of descendants, Scott, one of the most interesting things I think that your book brings up is that it's actually not known whether humans could procreate in outer space. So if the idea is to create a self-sustaining colony on Mars or on the moon, that might not be possible.
Yeah, this was actually, to me, one of the biggest surprises as I was researching this topic for my book is how little we know about whether reproduction even works in the conditions of space. We've done some studies with animals, some fish, some amphibians like frogs. We've done some work with rodents, but not nearly enough to actually know. And some of the results of the studies that have been done are kind of inconclusive. So it's actually really still a big question mark.
Do you think that it is part of this is about survival of us as a species, or is it about just a constant need to explore and expand, Scott?
I think it depends who you talk to. So definitely there are people who are interested in doing this for economic, geopolitical, motives. There's certainly people, though, who are also really motivated just by the science. We have so much that we can learn about the moon, about Earth, about our place in the universe, about life itself and where it came from. But at the end of the day, to me, the motivation that I think is most compelling is the idea that if we don't, that we could eventually become extinct here on Earth.
The other thing, Erika, and you're an astrophysicist, is that, and as I've reported over the years on things to do with space, one of the most compelling arguments for exploration seems to be that it inspires, that when, John F. Kennedy sent somebody to the moon, that there was a whole generation of scientists that were born who they were so excited about that. They decided they're going to go into science. What about that? Is that important enough of a reason to just keep on exploring whatever the cost may be?
It's certainly a reason that exists, and as someone who was motivated by pictures of space as a child and decided to go into the field of astrophysics because of that childhood inspiration, I certainly will not downplay that. I do worry sometimes that people in my position who have grown up really embedded in the science, or people at NASA, rely too much on inspiration as a sole purpose. Even back in the Apollo era, historically, sort of the peak heroic era of human space exploration that we all point to, there were still people, Americans at the time, who were arguing about, is there a better way to be spending our funds? Is this too much about the military Cold War competition with the Soviet Union? Should we be doing something else with our time and our brain power? And so those competing opinions are always going to be there, and it's important to listen to those as well, even while we're still all inspired by the beauty and the curiosity of space.
Scott, one more thing before we start to get to calls, but as you look at the billionaires that are sort of leading parts of this space race right now, does it seem like that's where the energy is, or is NASA still the biggest player around?
Well, it's interesting because it's actually hard to separate them. You know, a lot of the funding that, you know, companies like SpaceX have is actually from NASA. So in a way, like, we think of them as being different, but they're really closely intertwined. So I think, yes, the individual billionaires are motivated by some other motives, but at the end of the day, you know, NASA's about science and about inspiration.
Well, Tolliver, I'm sure that our guest Scott Solomon knows this because he's a professor there, but JFK's famous Man on the Moon speech was given at Rice University.
That's right.
Houston, we have trivia. Here's a portion of that speech titled, "We Chose to Go to the Moon."
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It's funny, I'd never heard that part about Rice playing Texas in that speech. I've heard that speech 1,000 times, and I never noticed that part until now, Tolliver. But
it's not the thesis, you know.
I guess not the really most important part. We'll be right back with your calls on The Middle. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, we are a national call-in show focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking if you think humans should be trying to live on other planets. Tolliver, what is the number to call in?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com.
And if you can't get through, by the way, because I can see right now that all of our lines are full, you can leave us a message and we will use that in our weekly podcast, The Follow-Up. I am joined by astrophysicist Erika Nesvold of the JustSpace Alliance and Rice University evolutionary biologist Scott Solomon, whose new book is called Becoming Martian. And before we get to those phone lines, I just want to ask about something that I think is a very important part of this conversation. Scott, what can we learn about the habitability of our own planet from the inhabitability of other planets? In other words, are there lessons, for example, about climate change on Mars, which used to be much warmer than it is today?
Yeah, well, what we've learned is that Mars indeed was much warmer. It had liquid water running on its surface, and it is, as far as we can tell, a dead planet now. So, of course, we want to know what happened to it, but I think it shows that you can have absolute catastrophe at the scale of an entire planet.
Erika, do you think it's possible to explore space, send rockets up to other planets without really destroying our own climate? I read that every rocket launch is the carbon equivalent of hundreds of airplane flights.
This is certainly a concern, and especially going forward, the number of rocket launches that people are proposing, not even to go to the moon or Mars, but just to put all of these satellite telescopes up into, not satellite telescopes, internet satellites up into orbit, is starting to accumulate and starting to be concerning. So at the same time that we're thinking about the use of fossil fuels and other technologies here on Earth, and at the same time that people are arguing we should go to space in order to escape climate change, we need to think about the impacts of all of our actions, whether that's the emissions from rocket launches or any effects of these technologies.
Right. Let's go to Robert, who's calling in from Burlington, Vermont. Robert, what do you think? Should humans be trying to go to other planets?
Well, I think that there's some money that we shouldn't be wasting on this. The moon is one thing. I can see a base on the moon. People would have to live underground because it costs about $10,000 per kilogram to lift something off the planet. And we're not going to be lifting heavy lead walls to shield people from the radiation that exists in space outside of the Van Allen radiation belt. And the moon and Mars are both outside the Van Allen radiation belt, and they don't have a radiation belt of their own because they don't have a magnetic field of their own like we have. And I think that answers why Mars did lose most of its atmosphere. It's smaller than the Earth. It cooled down billions of years ago, got totally solid, no liquid core, no magnetic field, no Van Allen radiation belt. The solar wind comes and just sweeps the atmosphere away. So, but that radiation will kill people. And so Leonard Susskind was pretty clear about this. People might get to Mars, but they're not going to live long.
Right. So you think the moon maybe, but not Mars. Robert, thank you for that. Scott, as you listened, we have very smart listeners, but as you listened there, what is he right about that in terms of what you would need to keep people down and to shield from radiation? Would people have to live underground? Oh, maybe we lost Scott. Erika, what about you?
Yes, the listener is correct. The radiation is one of the major health concerns in space, past the shelter of Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field, which protects us. And so, yeah, a lot of these science fiction images of living in these glittering glass domes on Mars with a beautiful view of the sky, initially at least, is going to be more like living in tunnels and kind of forgetting that you're even on Mars.
Let's go to Susan, who's calling in from Overland Park, Kansas. Susan, what do you think? Should humans be trying to live on other planets?
Hi there. I'm going to steer away from that question just enough to say one of my concerns about that possibility is our American interest in incarceration for profit. And then you combine that with the interests of billionaires. And I do wonder, and I'm wondering if anyone else is talking about this, the possibility that the workforce, the initial workforce and test humans would be incarcerated people, whether they were incarcerated, through any sort of just process.
You'd be worried that we'd be sending prisoners out into outer space.
Yes, I'm concerned that I believe the British Empire did that with, used Australia and the colonies as a form of severe punishment, and that seems within the realm of possibility.
Yeah. Susan, thank you for that. Erika, that's sort of right up your alley because you're talking about equity and justice in space.
That's right, and I've written about both criminal justice in space and labor rights in space, which is sort of a combination of the two concerns that the listener has. And certainly this idea is present in science fiction. One of the more famous novels by Heinlein about colonizing the moon is about a prison that's put on the moon. And so this is something to worry about. I don't think there are any announced plans to send incarcerated laborers into space as our test animals, so to speak. But there is a worry going into the future. What happens when we shift from our current stage where astronauts, people who live and work in space, are really these revered heroes in our culture, to eventually when we have enough people in space that they're just blue-collar workers that no one's really keeping an eye on them? What happens to their rights in that scenario? Yeah,
it's interesting because so far when somebody lands on another planet or even just orbits it, we're like they're explorers. They're showing us something, even a rover on Mars or something like that. They're like, oh, look at that little mountain and that kind of thing. Scott, have you thought about how soon we would need to have people just doing labor on other planets to try to prepare the colony or the planetary home for the humans?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because in many ways, a lot of what we need to accomplish in the early stages of creating a base or any sort of settlement are tasks that could be accomplished robotically. We need to be able to get there. We need to be able to set up infrastructure, set up power, potentially set up some food supplies. Those could, in theory, be done by sophisticated robotic technology, especially that includes AI. But the goal is still to set that up for people to go. So I think it still leads to the same question, which who are those people?
Very interesting. And maybe those people wouldn't want to go themselves. They're just being sent there. Let's go to Timothy, who's calling in from Cincinnati. Hi, Timothy. What do you think about humans going to other planets to live there?
Well, my comment was specific to the moon.
Okay.
And it may apply to other planets. Like nobody owns the moon right now. And that's a problem. I've got a law degree, so I look at this from that lens. Is there is a 1979 treaty that the United Nations sponsored. Of course, this major spacefaring nations didn't sign on, like the United States, Russia, and China. But you plant a base up there, are you starting a new age of colonialism or imperialism? Who is it first there gets the moon, or nope. These are things that have to be settled that aren't settled if we're going to start a moon base. I also wonder if anybody's watched Hollywood movies too that's doing this. Like, if you send up a bunch of Elon Musk's robots, are they going to go berserk up there?
What do you mean
guardrails
berserk?
For a? Well, remember in the Terminator where Skynet becomes aware, and then they start, they'll start shooting things back at us from the moon. I mean, I'm being funny, but this is stuff that you got to figure out. You can't send a bunch of prisoners up there because they do have basic human rights. At least I hope. So
Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that, Timothy. What do you think about that, Erika? What was brought up there, and President Trump did say in a recent speech that he wants to plant the stars and stripes on the moon. He wants it to be an American base.
Well, we're still working off a big international treaty from 1967 called the Outer Space Treaty that says nations can't claim territory in space. And it was written that way for just the reasons that Timothy was worried about. The USSR and the US and all the other countries who signed it wanted to avoid extending these Cold War proxy wars into space. But follow-up treaties like the Moon Treaty, which said no person can own territory in space, wasn't very popular, didn't catch on, didn't get signed by the major spacefaring nations. And so there's still sort of an open question of what will happen once individuals and corporations get up there and want to start claiming territory. The Outer Space Treaty says you can't claim territory, but you can sort of mark out where your base is, where your area of activity is, and you can't harmfully interfere with other people. And things like the Artemis Accords are trying to tighten up what some of that treaty actually means. But as several space lawyers have told me, a lot of that's we're going to have to wait and see until it's tested in court to see how it actually shakes out.
And would the court be on Earth?
Yeah.
Probably. Tolliver, what's coming in online? And I wonder if anybody is pro, sending more humans to other planets and to the moon.
Unfortunately not. Is Maria in Birmingham. She says, I've written a Horace in Mongolia. So sure, why not colonize the moon? But I don't want to live there. And since men are waging wars on Earth, I figure that's what they'll do on the moon too. Brendan in Denver says, no, we should be grounded in our room. Only when we have proven to be responsible stewards of our own planet should we be allowed outside. So,
okay,
nobody
Thanks,
wants to
Brendan.
go. I'll go, but they don't want to.
Let's go to Bill, who's calling in from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Bill, what do you think about this?
Oh, here's a voice on the other side.
Okay.
This is what National Science Foundation calls basic research. That's when you're doing research in an interesting area and you have no idea what you're going to learn. And I think I'm willing to bet we would learn some stuff that was very useful. So far, our endeavors in space have produced a lot of information that has proven to be useful, and your experts can delineate those much better than I could. So I think it's worth taking a poke at with caution.
Yeah.
Let's not run any unnecessary risk. Let's see what we can learn.
Okay, Bill, thank you for that. What do you think about that, Scott Solomon?
Well, I think Bill's right that we can learn quite a bit from going to other worlds, the moon, Mars, and elsewhere. And I do think that having people there will make it much easier, make it much faster, make it more efficient to learn these things. But I also agree that, we need to be cautious about the risks. So I do think it's a giant leap, so to speak, to go from sending people on round trip visits to going to stay. And that's, to me, kind of the biggest the biggest red line that I see. So I think, yes, let's go. Let's do the science. Let's learn as absolutely much as we can. But I don't think personally don't think we should be thinking about having kids up there just yet.
Do you think that the first people who end up taking a trip to Mars, and I assume that at some point in the coming decades there will be somebody that a human or multiple humans who actually do make it all the way to Mars, that they're going to go with the expectation that they will be able to come back to Earth? Scott?
I think that's actually an open question. I mean, I'd like to think so. So there's no reason in my mind that we shouldn't plan for that. Although I will tell you, I have talked to quite a few people who claim that they would gladly sign up for a one-way ticket to Mars. I'm constantly surprised by how many people I meet that say that they would. So it's not that we have a shortage of folks that would be willing to do it. So I think let's try to do it as safely as we can and bring those folks home.
Let's go to Tanya, who's calling in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Tanya, what do you think about this?
Hi. I agree with the one caller that we have learned a lot through NASA's work, things that have benefited us in certain ways here on Earth. I guess I just feel like there are so many issues on Earth. There are people who have, no health care, not enough to eat, no clean environment, and we should be taking our efforts in trying to solve these problems here on Earth rather than exporting things to another planet. We're not ready to screw up another planet until we solve our own issues here.
Yeah, an interesting point. Yeah, go ahead.
Especially, it's one thing if, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos want to spend their own money, but if we're talking about NASA's money, then, I would rather we spent it here for our needs.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Tanya. And we should say, Erika, that when Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are spending, quote, their own money, oftentimes they also do get some government help in doing that.
That's right. Quite a lot of subsidizing from the U.S. government and partnerships with NASA, as Scott mentioned earlier. And I think this is a completely reasonable question that Tanya and some of the other callers have alluded to, which is that as a society, we have to figure out how to distribute our resources here. That includes taxpayer dollars, but also where do we put our efforts? Where do we put our brightest minds and our technology? And so I think that there are a lot of people working in the area of space, whether that's in the industry or science, who are interested in figuring out how learning about space and building technology for space can help people here on Earth. And I think that's the best way to frame all of these questions is if you're going to do activities in space, how is it going to help people back here on Earth, whether that's basic research or spin-off technologies.
Right. And there certainly have been a lot of those spin-off technologies and a lot of basic research that has come out of space exploration. Let's go to another caller. Joe is in Fort Collins, Colorado. Joe, what do you think?
Hi, I absolutely think that we should send people wherever they want to go. I think plenty of people are willing to volunteer. And unfortunately, nobody gets excited when we just send machines. We've seen that with the Mars rover. I was an astronaut candidate. I don't know if I'd want to go to Mars personally, but I certainly see the applications. The return on investment that we get is many times what we spend. It's been proven time and time again with the Apollo program. I'd also mention that, I want to solve world hunger and everything else. We spent $10 billion on the one day in Iran. So, we spend way more money on other things that are not feeding people, and we don't get the same return on investment.
Joe, let me just ask you a question, because you said you were an astronaut candidate. Just quickly, what would you say is the number one reason that you wouldn't want to go to Mars, as you just said?
Oh, because right now the risk profile of getting back, I think there was a 10% chance that Apollo astronauts wouldn't get back. I think there's something like a 90% chance, at least with today's technology, that you would not return from Mars. So very high risk of not returning with today's technology.
Yeah, interesting. Joe, thank you very much for that call. And Scott, it's just interesting to think about somebody who is willing to go into outer space, but they still like their life on Earth enough that they don't want to give it up.
Absolutely. I've actually had an opportunity to talk with quite a few astronauts, and I've heard similar things. I won't name names, but that's not the first time I've heard somebody who would absolutely go to space, has been to space, has even been to the moon, and yet still sees Mars as being a step too far.
Well, Tolliver, as we mentioned, Elon Musk, who owns SpaceX, is at the forefront of this current iteration of the space race.
Yeah, and he's spoken a lot about what it would take to make a colony on Mars self-sufficient. Here he is addressing SpaceX employees last year.
We are dramatically increasing the number of ships that go to Mars, and ultimately try to get to 1,000 or 2,000 ships, per Mars rendezvous. I mean, as a rough order of magnitude, this is just guesses, obviously, but we need to get about 1 million tons, is my guess, to the surface of Mars to make a civilization on Mars self-sustaining. Again, to that critical point where if the resupply ships from Earth stop coming for any reason, Mars still succeeds. Mars can still grow.
By the way, Musk is running out of time to colonize Mars during his lifetime because the closest alignment of the planets, or the rendezvous as he called it, only comes around once every 26 months.
Oh,
so
he's got
take
time.
That, Elon.
How many years is that? That's good.
That's how long it takes. We'll be right back with your calls on The Middle. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and this hour we're asking if humans should be trying to live on other planets. I am joined by Rice University evolutionary biologist Scott Solomon, author of Becoming Martian, and Erika Nesvold, an astrophysicist and co-founder of the JustSpace Alliance. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can reach out and listen to themiddle.com. I will say, if there's any teenager staring up at glow-in-the-dark stars on his or her, bedroom ceiling, and you're like, I want to get out there and go to the moon or Mars, give us a call. I would love to hear from you. Before we get to the phones, though, one of the things that might need to happen in order to put a human civilization permanently on Mars or another planet or maybe even the moon is called terraforming. Scott, in layman's terms, what is that and how would that work?
The idea of terraforming is to make Mars more like Earth, right? So we know that Mars has a very harsh environment. It's super cold. It basically has no atmosphere, and so you couldn't walk around on the surface. Literally your body fluids would boil off. So the idea is we could potentially add gases to its atmosphere, and there's a variety of ways that people have proposed doing that to make it a place where it would be more tolerable, more suitable for us to actually live on the surface.
Do you think it's realistic, Erika, to be able to terraform? I mean, or would that be really far off?
It's realistic in the sense that physicists like myself can sit down with some pieces of paper and work out what you would need to do, how much gas you would need to add, etc., whether you need to put up giant mirrors to focus more sunlight at the surface, how you protect the new terraformed Mars from radiation, as mentioned earlier. So we can work out the details on paper, but we can do that for a lot of things, and it doesn't necessarily turn into a massive engineering project. At the moment, it looks like the energy requirements for terraforming Mars would be more than our entire human economy could handle at the moment, and would take hundreds of years. So once we get to the point where we can prove that humans are capable of a multi-century engineering project, I'll be a little more optimistic.
Let's go to Frank, who's calling in from Boston, Massachusetts. Hi, Frank. What do you think about whether humans should be trying to live on other planets?
Not at this time. I think we have the problem here is that I'm hearing that they want to do this before Trump goes out of office. And I think that we will get into the same scenario that happened with the Challenger when it went up too soon in order to appease Mr. Reagan, President Reagan. And I think that if we're doing this for the leaders that are currently in the space industry, like Bezos and Musk, who are immoral human beings, then I think we're going too fast, and we're having the wrong people in charge.
Frank, thank you. Scott, what do you think? Who is this for? Who is driving this right now? He mentions the billionaires. We've talked about them, and President Trump, who definitely does want the moon base, or at least astronauts on the moon before the end of his term. Is that who this is for, or is it for all of humanity, or what?
Yeah, so again, I think it depends on who you talk to, because there are really different motivations. I mean, part of what concerns me is that some of the language that has been used recently to describe the motivations are military. The current NASA administrator, Jared Isaacman, has said in multiple instances that the moon is the ultimate high ground. This is a strategic move in order to, to secure a strategic advantage. It's geopolitical. Again, if you're talking to entrepreneurs, if you're talking to, billionaires, they see potential profits to be made. But again, there are scientific motivations. So it depends really who you talk to.
Let's get to another caller. And James is calling in from Dallas, Texas. Hi, James. What about you? What do you think about humans trying to live on other planets?
I think we should go. I think that we can't wait to solve all our problems because we never will. We'll never get out the door if we wait on that. We won't have people that are completely moral. We won't have all our problems set. I would recommend that people read Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy, and I think you'll get a better understanding of what is the possible. And one last comment. We built the pyramid, so I think that as a civilization, we should be able to handle a couple hundred years.
Do you think that it's going to happen, James, in your lifetime? Do you think that there will be somebody, a human being on Mars?
I don't think a human being. I think we need probably about 50 years, maybe 70 years with the current political environment, which has, kind of decapitated our efforts here in the United States. But it may not come from the United States. I think China may have a better shot because they have an organization, they have a society that believes in the future and a society that can plan and organize themselves. And so I think they've learned from the West, and I think they'll be able to take that knowledge. So I'm actually betting on the Chinese.
Yeah, interesting. Erika, it brings up an interesting point, which is that in China, they obviously don't have to deal with elections every 4 years or really ever. So in that case, here in the United States, one of the reasons that the space race changes so much is because every president comes in. It takes longer than 4 or 8 years to actually accomplish these things, but every president comes in with different priorities and says, now let's do this.
It's true, and this is sort of what I was referring to earlier with the difficulties of any multi-generational effort, which would include establishing a permanent human presence on the moon or Mars. That's going to take multiple generations of focused work, focused as in not changing every time you get a new Congress in session. And this is what the space program in the U.S. has struggled with. China has less of that particular issue, but multi-generational work is still difficult as the global situation and priorities continue to change. But I think, to put on my optimist hat, I think humanity is moving in the direction of learning how to do these massive projects together for the good of everyone. So I'm hoping as we continue to learn those lessons through climate change and other things here on Earth, we can use those same lessons in space.
Dominique is calling in from Chicago, Illinois. What do you think about humans trying to live on other planets, Dominique?
I just don't understand what the benefit is to humanity. The only reasons I've heard for colonizing Mars is that we won't have a planet to live on, so we have to. If it takes hundreds of years and more energy than we even have on this planet to do so, wouldn't it make more sense for us to make our own planet habitable? Also, the reasons for exploring space, even in that clip you played from Kennedy, his only reason was because it's hard. There's plenty of things that are hard that we can do here. So I'm just wondering, what do your guests consider the benefits for humanity to colonizing space? How does it benefit, like, say, me and my descendants to colonize space?
Scott Solomon?
Yeah, so as I said before, to me, the most compelling motivation ultimately is about long-term survival. And it's not so much about, that we are giving up on our planet, but it's there could be some sort of a disaster, an asteroid impact as an example, that we couldn't avoid, that in the long run would mean that we go extinct unless we are spread out among the planets. But then the question is, how soon is that likely to happen, and how quickly should we be pushing to do it? So I continue to say, yes, let's move forward with learning, but let's not go so fast that we're being reckless.
What do you think, Erika?
I'm right there with Scott that I find the someday possible extinction of humanity to be the most compelling reason to eventually spread out and learn how to live other places in space beyond the Earth. But I'll point out that a lot of people have used that exact argument to push for really extreme models of what that could look like. and that would lead to a lot of suffering on Earth and in space, pollution, etc. And so the problem is when you're talking about the stakes that high, the extinction of the human race, you can get away with arguing for some really brutal things. And so I think it's important that we think about what we want that future to look like, and as Scott says, move deliberately and learn as we go, because we'll also be generating benefits the more we learn for those of us back here on Earth.
Let's get to Destiny, who's calling in from St. Louis, Missouri. Destiny, what do you think about humans trying to live on other planets?
Hi, yeah, I have a complex take. Like, I understand the benefits and we gain a lot from the research, but I think, like, I'm an engineer, and I think until we reach the, like, edge, the max capacity of what robots can do, then I don't think we should be sending humans to space, at least not Moon and Mars. Like, until there's nothing else we can do. It's cheaper, and we don't need to send food, water. We can use any amount of acceleration. There's no, it doesn't need to come back alive. So it's a lot cheaper. Even if it doesn't make it, we can just throw it up there. And if it wrecks, like, it's so cheaper than we're worrying about human life. So
take that AI. Yes, Destiny. It's a great point, and I want to go to Scott Solomon on that. You've thought so much about this, Scott. What do you think? What about the argument that why don't we just continue to send robots out there because they don't have to worry about procreating or anything else?
I mean, it's totally true. I mean, I agree with that point. I actually have an article coming out tomorrow in The Conversation that explores exactly this topic because, yes, it's cheaper. It's, much less risky. So why don't we? And why? I mean, we have to a certain extent, right? We've done that with, we've got robots on Mars at the moment. But I come back to this. I recently got to see the new movie Project Hail Mary, right? And, here's a blockbuster Hollywood hit. What is so compelling about it? And I won't give any spoilers away, but I think, everybody knows the basic premise if you've seen the trailer, right? You're following a person on this long shot space mission to try to save humanity. That is something that motivates people. I think at the end of the day, the reason that we keep sending people into space is exactly because it's so risky. And we all get behind those efforts when there's human life on the line. So I think that's going to keep moving us to send people, even if we could send robots that would be cheaper and that would be less dangerous.
Did you see the movie in 70 millimeter IMAX?
I absolutely did. Yeah.
Okay. I'm wondering whether I need to do that or is it okay just in regular? Anyway, we'll find out.
Only way to go.
Okay. Let's sneak in another call here in McCade, who's in Birmingham, Alabama. What do you think about sending humans to other planets?
Hi. So I'm listening, and that last comment was actually brilliant. I studied mass densities in black holes at Columbia University, and I think, yes, absolutely go and study space and colonize space. But I think not yet. I think we need to develop the technologies, better technologies that are reliable for artificial gravity and to prevent things like long-term exposure gamma radiation. And once those things are developed and verified for long-term usage in space and can take different types of damages through either, being on the moon or in transport as well, then life is a little bit more reasonable for life to go to space.
There's just more work to be done right now before we do that.
What is that?
There's more work to be done, more research to be done, you're saying, before we get to that point.
Yes. There's more research to be done here on Earth that we can do to help ease the real issues that would be existential threats to life in space. And those really, in my opinion, are the two biggest ones. Just random, very small, fast particles. And the thing is that those are not just threatening to life. It's actually also threatening to things like robots and AI that we're going to send out there, because all of that gamma radiation, it changes, it will bump into any type of mass and rearrange it. So whatever we have out there, we have to protect it. And I think space travel right now is like when we invented the automobile. We invented a car that could go, and it could go fast, and it was new, but was it safe yet? No, absolutely not. It took decades for us to really figure out how to insulate and protect what was the cargo of the automobile. So I think that needs to be equally just as much the focus of all researchers in this field as is propulsion and cutting down on, the time that it takes to get somewhere. Because that seems to be the big focus is propulsion. And how are we going to get there? How are we going to get there faster and faster and faster? Well,
Got it, McCade. But Erika, it's interesting as I listen to that and many of the other callers that we've had, I think to myself, if the president were to give a speech now like Kennedy did that we heard earlier, he might not have the cheers that he did, because it sounds like there's a lot of skepticism from our listeners about, this. Do we really need to send people right now? Should we be spending money on this? What do you think?
It's true, and polling has shown us the data backs up our sense from your listeners tonight that that Americans are less motivated to spend our joint tax money in space. There's still a lot of goodwill towards NASA and space science, but not as convincing about how we put our resources towards that. I think there's still a lot of support for astronauts. I'll throw in, on behalf of the biologists, that the one thing we get when we send humans to explore space also is that we learn more about what space does to humans, which does help shape those safety arguments. And people, as Scott mentioned, are motivated by watching humans, and Americans are motivated by watching Americans go into space. But we clearly have a lot of other stuff going on. And I think people don't necessarily see what sending people to the moon did for us, and so they want clearer answers this time about what it does for us.
Before we go, I just want to ask each of you what you think are the odds, let's say in the next 50 years, of a human colony on the moon and Mars. Scott Solomon.
I think we very likely will be building infrastructure on the moon. It sounds like that is happening, whether we support it or not. On Mars, I think we will see human boots on the ground on Mars. I'm going to go ahead and say within 10 years. But I think we are very far away from actually having a true settlement. I don't think it's going to happen in 50 years.
Erika, what do you think?
I agree with both of those estimates, and I think it's not just a matter of how much our technology needs to develop, but also a matter of whether the political and economic will is there. And of course, that's impossible to estimate from 50 years out, how that's going to evolve around the world. But I don't think humanity has a compelling case to put our efforts into such a fast timeline yet.
It's kind of interesting to hear the words boots on the ground to be talking about Mars and not, Iran, which is what we've been talking about recently. Tolliver, what do you think? Do you think in the next 50 years there's going to be a human colony on the moon and Mars?
I do, and I got to tell you, I'm so down to go. I know I've said it several times during the show. Send me, imagine the Instagram stories. Right? Come on.
I don't know if Instagram's going to be around 26 months later. I want to thank our guests, Erika Nesvold, astrophysicist and co-founder of the JustSpace Alliance, author of Off-Earth Ethical Questions and Quandaries for Living in Outer Space, and Rice University professor Scott Solomon, author of the new book, Becoming Martian, How Living in Space Will Change Our Bodies and Minds. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. This has been so much fun.
And next week, we're going to be talking about something right back here on Earth, healthcare, and asking if your healthcare is working for you. Remember that a few months ago, premiums jumped for a lot of Americans.
You can weigh in by calling us at 8444-MIDDLE or by going to listentothemiddle.com, where you can also subscribe to our Substack newsletter.
Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Brandon Kondritz, Marina Price, and Johnny Leonidas. Our technical director is Steve Mork. If you like this show, subscribe to the podcast version of The Middle. Every week we include extra calls and conversations that don't make it into the broadcast. There are going to be a lot this week because the lines were full the whole time. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you next week.